You're listening to WKDW Radio 97.5 FM and KDWRadio.com, broadcasting from the Bishop West Real Estate Mobile Tower right here in Northport, Florida. We've got a nice cool front moving in. It's Friday night. Please, please, please take your time because traffic is intense. People need to get home safe. I am talking with an insurance agent who will tell you slow down, take your time. There's no reason to drive fast. We're going to talk about some really interesting topics today because we're right in the mix of, I think, some confusing times for a lot of our listeners. But I've got Justin Box in the house from Hardin Insurance Group and Allstate Insurance. Justin, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, man?
Not too bad. You know, we've the last 3 weeks we've kind of been through just a complete trashing of our community, thanks to Ian. And I would like to have kind of an open dialogue with you as far as the hurricane side of things go. Alicia, hello, how are you doing? Thanks for texting in. I appreciate that. Um, where do you see insurance after this? What do you see happening in the future for us as consumers?
It's a little hard to say right in this very moment because it's all hands on deck, just handling claims and trying to, push through that and get people put back together as best we can. But then as the dust starts to settle from that, things definitely get reanalyzed. They start seeing what their losses were, and large storms like this, and all storms really, but large storms like this, they really, that we use past storms. I say we, but the insurance companies use past storms to run models all the time and try to, make sure that they're being responsible and have enough money to handle what they have insured and so on. So that'll continue to evolve over the years. And Irma about 5 years ago was changed a bunch of things, and I think this will learn more lessons from this storm again, because every one of them is unique and brings their own unique damages and so on. The biggest thing, just off the top of my head, will be this is just me thinking out loud, but most of our insurance companies have what's called reinsurance, and that is big global financial institutions that kind of give our companies their financial backbone, and they kick in and pay a lot of these claims in these catastrophe situations, and they do that globally. So that'll definitely be taking an increase, and those companies will be, looking at that. And we all it's kind of weird, you're kind of sharing the cost, because our cost goes up when there's wildfires out west or when there's a tsunami on the other side of the world, because it's these same financial institutions, from what I understand, that help companies across the whole globe. So they're the deep pockets that really fit the bill for this stuff, but they're in business to make money. So we'll be seeing, the areas that have these problems, typically I would imagine see their reinsurance costs go up, which have been going up anyway. But I would imagine our area is going to see more of an increase there than other areas due to us being the culprit for the claims this go round. So that's just in an immediate nutshell, because I do get that question a lot too from a lot of my customers that may have just a minor damage and they're apprehensive to file a claim. And hurricane claims don't go against you, aren't held against you, aren't considered in underwriting when you're trying to get a new policy, or they're not supposed to be anyway. And most policy pricing doesn't have, they're not sophisticated enough to have claim surcharges in them from our Florida property insurance company. So we're all on the same rate train together, and all of our rates are going to go up whether you end up filing a claim in this storm or not. So and it's advisable in hurricane situations to go ahead and get that claim on the books for multiple reasons.
Well, especially because if it gets grouped all together and you're going to get a rate increase and you don't file a claim, well, that's on you. If the storm was caused by Ian, and the reason you're not held accountable is it wasn't caused by you directly, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said the reason that you're not held accountable is you didn't cause the storm. It was caused by Mother Nature. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Then those act of God type things don't go against you. Kind of a bummer. Other claims do, because most claims people didn't do anything negligent to cause a pipe to burst or whatever may happen. But these catastrophe claims definitely do not get held against you, and then all of our policies are going to go up together. Plus your hurricane deductible. I guess other people, the other thing considerations is a lot of us have this very large hurricane deductible. That's totally normal here in Florida. Um, Say you have a $8,000 deductible and you get $6,000 worth of damage, and you go, well, I'm not going to waste my time filing the claim. The claim should be pretty quick and easy because they'll quickly analyze and see that you didn't have that much damage. But those deductibles are different than most other deductibles in my business. A hurricane deductible is an aggregate deal. So per hurricane season, you only pay that once. It's like a health insurance deductible. So if Ian comes through and you had $6,000 in damage and you had an $8,000 deductible, you didn't hit the deductible, so no payout comes from Ian. But if another named storm comes through, causes damage, you only have $2,000 of deductible left. So if you get another $10,000 in damage, well, now you got a $2,000 deductible, and the other eight would get paid in that scenario. So that's the other advisable thing, because the insurance company will go ahead and already have that on the books and know that you've chewed up X amount of your deductible. So it's advisable, unless the only time we're supposed to tell everybody to file a claim, but if you lose 3 panels of a fence or something and it's a few $100s, I don't know if I'd waste my time for that. But most scenarios, especially with this storm, have been much greater damage than that.
so I want to talk a little bit about the homeowners policy, and then I want to kind of get into like the wind shearing of that, and then also go into flood. And I want to keep them separate because they're not the same policy.
Mm-mm.
So, can you talk first about homeowners policy? And I'm really going at this for citizens right now a different way. There's a fear factor a lot of times when you go into an insurance agent's office and you sit down in front of them that they're going to upsell you on everything. And I want to kind of take that off the table right now because you're not buying anything watching this show. And this is exactly what I think you should do with your insurance agent when you go in the door today. Because now we've been slammed with Education 101, which is this storm. This storm created a lot more havoc in our territory now than we had with Charlie and even Irma. There was not this kind of devastation. There weren't these claims at this level in either one of those two storms. But if I were to sit down across from you at your desk, tell me what the difference is in a homeowner's policy that I should be paying attention to when I get one from you.
So what we try to do in our
I lost you. I lost you. You faded. You faded out.
we can, utilizing all the
Can you,
resources. Oh,
can you start that over again? You kind of faded out.
oh, sorry there. Yeah, something that we do here, that we kind of take pride in, is we try to set ourselves in the customer's shoes and say, okay, well, if this is my house, how would I insure this? And when we're setting up the homeowners policy, we're going through trying to make sure that we've got all the right things in place. They are a package policy by default. However, there's some little side things that need to kind of be tacked on, and we go around and try to make sure those policies are built out that way, so that they're not out coverage if something were to happen, and uh, are we able to do that perfectly every time? Probably not. I mean, we're not perfect, but we try to be as detailed as possible. And and then when this, it's like you said, we're kind of back to school because there's some stuff that we've found out that certain policies always have these little quirks between one company to the next, and some of them I consider good quirks. It's like, oh, this company does this, but nobody else does. So yeah, that particular item's covered, whereas it normally wouldn't be, and vice versa. And we try to stay abreast to all of that stuff, and we're usually notified of all that stuff if something's changing throughout the years. But we're finding some stuff that might not be covered real well that we thought was. I mean, it's been frustrating to say the least, because that's not how we want to find that stuff out. But at any rate, again, part of the learning experience. I mean, I remember one of our companies after Irma, they didn't even realize their leaders didn't realize that this one little piece of the coverage on their condo policies was left out, and they're like, we're trying to, like, it was cool to see them say, we're trying to get creative to see how we can pay these people, because we want to pay these people, but we legally can't because our verbiage doesn't read the right way, and we're going to fix this ASAP. So it's interesting to see. You think of, before I was in the industry, you think of this big company holding tight to their dollars, not wanting to pay their claims and so on. But in a lot of cases, that's not true. There's people are in the business to try and protect people, and and you know do what we can to make them whole again. But that's our goal. And then our goal too is to educate the customer, which I think is super important. Here's what we've got here. Here's what your deductibles are. Here's what this piece of the policy does, and so on down the list, so that they know. I don't expect them, if you quiz them on it 2 weeks later, to be able to recount everything we talked about. But at the time they're buying the policy, they know, hey, we've gone through and we've done this and we've done this and we've thought about this, and this coverage is for my outbuildings and fences and so on and so forth down the list. So that's really our goal, is to really protect people the same way we would protect ourselves. So
Well, and I kind of want to expand that conversation just for a second. So, if you have a homeowner's policy, and we're just strictly talking homeowners right now, if you add a fence and let's say a lanai and a shed, should you call your insurance agent and tell him you added these things? Is there add-on coverage for that?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. So most lanais are covered by default. Screen material is not. Things that protrude the structure, like a pool cage, we do have to tack on an extra coverage for. Um, but most of your lanais under roof and stuff are covered. Um, but we're seeing some crazy stuff too for all the people listening. Don't panic at whatever your field adjuster says, because we're hearing all kinds of crazy stuff. Some of it may be accurate, a lot of it's not. Most of them are not from Florida. They don't know some of the little quirks of our policies, and some of them are doing an excellent job. Most of them are doing an excellent job, I should say. Some of them are doing. We're hearing some crazy stories back. Some of these guys are kind of quirky, but their job is just documenting the initial stuff that they can see, getting that into the carrier, and then the person inside the company, we call them insider desk adjusters. They're the ones with the checkbook, and then when we start showing them, here's what this stuff's actually going to cost to, because these initial estimates are coming in really, really low and making people panic, myself included. So we've already been witnessing the supplement. So a supplement is when the initial estimate said this is going to cost 10,000, but then you show them, well, hey, here's my guy doing the work. It's going to be 15,000. Then they open that piece of the claim back up and they go, okay, yeah, we need to adjust this to 15. Here's 5,000 more dollars, and so on. So there's going to be supplements like crazy for almost every scenario um, in this situation. But yes, all of that stuff. Anytime if you've upgraded the interior, you do a new kitchen or bathroom, when we write the policy, we usually have the conversation about, hey, we've done a replacement cost estimator. I can see what square footage your house is. I can see what square footage, I can see what size your garage is and what square footage your lanai and that stuff. Here's what we've come up with. And then I always tell people, this is assuming sort of a builder's grade type build out. If there's upgraded flooring, cabinetry, carpet, losing my train of thought, flooring and cabinetry and countertops, stuff like that, we need to account for that, because you could have a $30,000 kitchen, or you could have a $150,000 kitchen. That can make a huge difference in what you need to cover the house at, to make sure it's covered properly, especially in event of a total loss. But um, all of the above, yes, there's tack on coverage for that. Other structures would cover your sheds and fences and so on. Most policies have a little bit of coverage there by default, but once you start adding that stuff, it's you usually need to beef it up a little bit, and it usually doesn't change the price for other structures, for sheds and fences, a whole lot. So.
So it's worth taking time out anytime that you do anything to your home, just to go ahead and give a quick call to your insurance agent and give them an update of what you've added in, whether it's an upgrade or new carpet, new flooring, new appliances, new shed,
Mm-hmm.
just a new fence around your backyard. Um, those types of things in today's world right now, if you would have not done that prior to this hurricane, and you've lost a shed, you've lost your aluminum lanai, and you've lost your fence. There's no catching up with that, is there?
Probably not, no, because we ran into that where we were getting calls, when a storm starts getting close. All the insurance companies kind of go on lockdown, because people will kind of come out of the woodworks and try to get. They may not have any insurance at all or something, and they'll be trying to buy a policy right before the storm hits, which that doesn't usually work. So beware there. But yeah, we did get some calls where people had added a pool and a cage, and they're like, did we call and let you guys know that we did that? And no, we got no record of that. So luckily, the handful of people we talked to kind of before the storm that had realized, oh, shoot, I forgot to call them, and then got busy. And that was 3 months ago, one of those deals. As far as my knowledge, most of them fared pretty well. So it was like bullet dodge, but some of them, some did, some did not. We're finding out some of these that we wrote it, and then outbuildings were added and so on, and we weren't contacted, and we don't know that they were there, so we didn't tabulate for them on the original policy. So it's been a wild ride to say the least.
So I'm going to address this a different way because, like I said at the beginning, I want to try to take the fear out of this conversation with people, even though um, they should have had been fearless before. Okay, because the worst case scenario is you call and you find out, and maybe the number's too high, so you make a decision then. But the things that we're talking about adding on, uh, those things wouldn't have really upped the policy. It wouldn't have like doubled the policy at that point to add on a pool screen and the pool and the shed and the fence. It wouldn't have doubled your policy, would it?
No, usually not. The detached structures like fences and sheds and stuff. It's usually pretty painless to up that, and just a few dollars extra. Um, Pool cages and aluminum structures, depending on the carrier, can vary, but it's usually a couple $100 or less. Oftentimes it's less than $100 when we add a pool cage on. Um,
And that's
the
annual.
pool, it's annually, and then the pool itself. So when, say, a pool and a cage gets added on, that also gets added into the main dwelling coverage. So two things happen there. We adjust the dwelling coverage amount, which that'll adjust the price, and we tack on a side coverage for wind and hail, for the screen, the cage itself. And again, the material is typically not covered, but the structure of the cage is covered. It's kind of a weird quirk on the Florida policies, and one carrier I think that we have. I'd have to double check that, but last I knew, if they haven't changed anything, screen material was actually covered. That was one of those good quirks, but 95% of the time, the screen material is not going to be covered on the Florida policy. But yes, so if we add a pool and a cage, my guesstimation is 200 a year, 200 to 300 a year, difference in price, which, the way the policies are anymore, that's peanuts versus the
But
the huge premium now.
it's really cheap though. When you
Not bad.
start adding up a lot of what happened today with a lot of people who don't have coverages, you could spend really anywhere from probably six to 14 to $20,000 just for a pool cage.
Yes, yeah. Actually, just a buddy of mine that just been having some conversations with him about that, um, and it's going to be interesting because we're gonna need. It popped in my head a few months before the storm. I was like, for years we've been putting $10,000 on pool cages, your kind of normal sized pool cages, and smaller. The starting point of those coverages was 10,000, and I pondered that couple months before the storm. I was like, man, the aluminum prices and all this stuff. Like, I wonder if we've got enough on there anymore. And talking to a buddy of mine that's working with a local screen company, uh, there's got to be. I'm gonna have to send out a blast email because there's a lot of policies out there that don't have quite enough um, on them, per what the cost of those are now. But it sounds like 15,000 and up is more a going price for a pool cage, um, in this scenario, because I had one 480 square feet the other day that was estimated out at 14,000 and change, and that's on the smaller side, of course, kind of normal 750 to 850 for Northport, and then they go up from there, of course, to get pretty large.
Sure. So I want to kind of take off from the homeowner's policy and now couple it in with some flood. And I want to talk about flood for a second because Chuck English asked a question. He says, "What about those individuals that were not told or unaware that they're in a flood zone?" And the only way, and I'm going to go back to the purchase for a second, just because I can help with that side of it. When you're purchasing, your agent is going to help you if you're buying it from or through a realtor. They're going to let you know whether you're in a flood zone or not. Ultimately, it does come down to responsibility of the buyer, the consumer. If you are not working with someone, a professional, and you buy a piece of property, you're obligated to find out about your own property. A lot of the people who flooded though, in our region right now, let's just take Northport and not get outside the scope because we had major flooding here caused by a huge amount of downpour of rain, not just here but further up the watershed. And we've educated on that. But I do want to talk about this because a lot of people aren't in a flood zone that flooded. So they didn't have flood. They were in an ex flood zone and they were not slated to get any, and nor did anybody really think I should have it. Is that pretty accurate?
Um, yes and no, but yes, mostly. Uh, if somebody if somebody asks us about flood and flood zone and so on, and if they're in a flood zone, obviously we bring that up 100% of the time. But um, it's something that usually pops up in our conversation, and it's in the homeowner's insurance app. It's kind of in your face about, hey, flood's not covered here on this particular policy. That's always a separate policy for the most part. Some homeowners companies are starting to get where they can, you can add flood in on them, but that's still pretty rare at this point. Um, but my little speech that press play on my broken record speech here, for flood is, we're all in a flood zone. Everything's a flood zone. When FEMA maps a county, it's all a flood zone. It's just what level of flood zone. And really, within FEMA, there's really only 3 or 4 tiers. There's kind of what you mentioned, flood zone X, which is a majority of Northport. That is where, in layman's terms, most people would say, "Oh, I'm not in a flood zone, so I don't need flood." And I, I hate it when people say that. I always tell them, we're all in a flood zone. X is the lowest risk as far as the FEMA maps are concerned, and then your A zones are kind of the middle risk. We see a lot of that around Port Charlotte, but there's definitely A zones here in Northport as well. And then V zones are typically out on the barrier islands, Sanibel, Captiva, and stuff like that. V zones are concerned with actual like moving water. They're worried about water that's going to come through and maybe could just push a house off of its slab. Whereas A zones are more docile rising water concerns, as are the X, B, and C zones, or the quote unquote non-flood zones. But my little spiel and my take on flood, because you kind of get taught this. I've taken quite a bit of flood education over the years, and I find it abrasive. I don't say this to people, but I sometimes I tell them this, that I think this is kind of goofy, but it's unfortunately true. And one of the education classes when I first started a long time ago, said if your customers ask if it can flood there, you should follow that up with a question: well, can it rain there? And I think that sounds that's not my style to say something like that to somebody, but unfortunately it's the truth. Too much rain too fast in most areas can cause a flood. And my take on South Florida in general is it's flat as a board, and so the water doesn't run off necessarily super fast. Northport's done an awesome job, by the way, because I've lived here a while, and we used to have a whole lot more flooding problems. If it would have been 20 years ago and we would have got hit with these rains, this would have been substantially worse. I
Yes.
mean, it would have been unbelievable. Like, it was already unbelievable, but it would have been feet and feet more. I'd probably be 5 feet deeper than it was, maybe more. So anyway, I always use the analogy of pouring a cup of water on a table. It's like it runs off. It might run off, but it's not running off real quick. And essentially, what I observe around here and understand, basically, the more it rains, and then you see our ditches fill up and our canals fill up, and the water starts to flow. Well, it can only flow off at a certain rate through all those avenues. And if the water keeps coming out of the sky faster than it's flowing off, it's got nowhere to go but up. So I've always said that to people here in Northport, is because they're like, oh, we're far enough inland to not worry about storm surge. True, for the most part. I don't think we're at a storm surge risk in most parts of Northport. There are some parts that are, but the storm surge impacts us because it's like a water dam. If you think where all our water runs off down through the Mayaca, the Cocoa Plum, and down through all the canals in Port Charlotte. Well, Charlotte Harbor and all those canals are 10, 15 feet deeper than they normally are. Then the water's not flowing like it normally would. And then you got all of ours just getting backed up, and it's really the rain. But too much rain too fast is always the big risk for Northport. And we saw it last year as well. Those heavy rains we had, and then the estates, basically from Sumter out to Ponce de Leon and out to River Road, basically where the Mayaca is. You got the Mayaca and the Mayacahatchee Creek, and if you look north of the estates, you've got a vast amount of land out there, and all of that drains right through that area, which is what we saw this time in Mayaca getting. I think the Mayaca and the Mayacahatchee Creek almost came together as one, and it was like a sheet flow through there and breached the interstate.
It's crazy.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Crazy. So I know that we were not trying to guesstimate on insurance policies themselves, but uh, Bill or Chuck, can you tell me, are you asking this on just flood, or are you asking this on residential homeowners policy? There's a difference between the two, but I want to maybe take this and run it on an insurance side. So if you had, or a flood side, and I know for a fact that I've got a customer who had flood. His policy was at about 175, and his was $300, and he was in a flood zone. Okay, so when we're talking about a flood policy, and he said flooding general. So I, if you had a house, um, let's use your house for an example, Justin, because
Mhm.
your house is probably in that $400,000 range, right?
Yeah,
Roughly.
somewhere around there. Yeah.
So let's use the $400,000 range, and we'll talk about you specific, only because uh, that insurance policy, that homeowner's insurance policy, is one piece, and then let's say that you wanted to get in an X flood zone, you wanted to buy flood insurance on that home, would your flood insurance policy with no content, let's just do flood, okay? And then we're going to talk about the other side of it, okay? Would that policy be overly expensive if you're in an X flood zone?
Um, I would have a couple years ago. I'd been easily answer this question. The max you were going to pay was, up around $600. But flood changed the way they rate now, and for basically your X zones, like what most of Northport is, it used to be these cookie cutter policies with a set rate, and it was a set policy, and you would do a 250,000 for building and 100,000 for contents, and it'd be $572, and now they've changed their rates, and you can't even ballpark them anymore. They don't use logic, I guess. I don't know if I should say that or not, but the rates don't make any sense anymore, to be dead honest. And so ballparking one, we've seen these that would have been $500-600 forever. I've been doing this since '04, and that's the way it always has been up until about a year and a half ago. I forget the exact date that they changed that, but um, it might be $300, which would be kind of an anomaly on the low side, but we've seen them be more in the $1,000 to $1,500 range, even for X zone now. So it's a little odd. And then if you're in flood zones, new policies are wildly more expensive for the most part than they used to be.
Is that why we need to get um, maybe state representation involved and federal representation involved to kind of get these things kind of settled down some?
Yeah, the flood rates are controlled by Congress. I mean, it's a FEMA program. The National Flood Insurance Program is part of FEMA, um, and they did a bad job throughout history rating those, and it was just, I guess, supplemented with government income because the rates were lower than they should have been. The flood program was always in the red, and it was just kind of no private insurance company could have ever rated like that. They would have gone out of business. So, but it was always in the red, and then they kept fiddling with it. A few years back, they made all these radical changes, and it was literally pushing people out of their homes. And people were losing, they couldn't sell their property because people have to pay $17,000 for flood insurance and all this stuff. Then they reverted back to the old way because they're like, we didn't realize what kind of impact we were going to have on people. And then just here recently, they've rolled out this new rating program that doesn't hardly take into account elevations or anything like that anymore. It does to a degree, but not like it used to. Which is why it's just impossible until we'd have to plug in an address and see what number came out of the system at the end of it anymore. But yeah, it's
And
wild. But
I want to go back to elevation because you said something there. What is the flood zone elevation?
so there is in A zones, which is what we deal with mostly around here for the actual quote unquote flood zones. There's typically a number called the base flood elevation. That number is a number that FEMA throws out there when they map the county. It goes through, and there may be all these AE zones, for example, and then each specific location will have a base flood elevation. Base flood elevation is just a number on the flood map that's in the flood system, and that's what traditionally, basically for the county to be in compliance with all the FEMA stuff, they've got to make sure all finished floor elevations, so the actual finished floor of houses, have to be at or above base flood elevation for that county to be in compliance with FEMA and to be part of the flood program to a degree. And then in the last few years, a lot of the counties have gone to, hey, we're doing a +1. So if base flood elevation's 8, we're going to require everybody to be in that particular area to be at 9 feet or above for all these new homes. And that was really helping with flood because it was knocking rates from $1,800 down to $1,000 on those particular homes. And if you went a couple feet over, it would be $600. And now now all that effort and stuff is may or may not pay off. It's like they're just, it feels like they're just pulling numbers out of the sky, to be honest. But and they're wild. Some of them are wild. But my hope is that private companies, because we're starting to get more private companies that are starting to write flood. There's a lot of data they need to collect and a lot of claims experience they need to figure out before they can competently rate these. So they're really slowly getting into writing flood insurance, and that my hope is that we can get there, because these flood policies they have building coverage and contents coverage, and a lot of people do just building and no contents if they're being forced to buy the flood from their mortgage company, and there's no other bells and whistles. Like, there's nothing else. So if you're forced out of your home due to a flood, there's nothing in that policy that'll pay to put you up somewhere else, whereas a homeowner's policy will do those types of things. So these flood policies are just so simple, with just, we're going to cover building, and if you've got it, we're going to cover your contents to a degree. And again, not the building side, they cover similar to a homeowner's policy. The content side, they actually depreciate your stuff down to a degree and pay you those numbers. So very simple policies, and it's for rising water too, so people know what we're talking about when it comes to flood. Rising water from the outside in is what's excluded by the homeowner's policy, and then that's where you would need flood coverage to protect you for that event.
So a flood policy is very similar in the regards that your homeowner's policy covers the building for wind, but there's also content. A flood policy covers you from water intrusion, okay, not through the roof, but flood, front door, back door, around the windows, whatever, depending on height. Okay, and you're really getting water inside your home with a non-leaking roof, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can get like wind-driven rain and stuff like that, which is not considered a flood. So to be considered a flood, oh gosh, taking me back to school here, but um, it has to be like a pool of water outside that's getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and it comes up, and then flows into the house. Um, the technical, there's some technicalities as far as FEMA is concerned, and it has to be the pool of water. There's a size that it has to be, and this never comes into play around here. So it's always the other qualification, but there's two categories. I think has to be 3 acres. Don't quote me on that, but the size of the pool of water has to be 3 acres or larger, or touching multiple properties. So in Northport, if water comes up and gets into somebody's house, that pool is definitely touching a neighboring property, so it's classified as a flood. So that's the one that sticks in my mind, because that's relative to our area. If water comes up and gets in a home around here, that pool that got deep enough to get in their house, definitely going to be touching the neighboring lot as well. So it'll be categorized as a flood.
So I'm going to talk. I want to talk to the citizens right now that if they did not have flood policy and they were not harmed with wind, let's say their roof was fully intact, or even their roof was damaged, they would have to have two policies, would they not? The flood policy and the homeowner's policy. In
And you said
order
at the beginning that they got
they were
rising water in the house.
Yep, rising water. They were involved in the flood, and they would have to have a flood policy for that. And then because of let's say the siding of their house came detached, and then some roof damage, that would be the homeowner's policy at that point, correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So in those scenarios are rough, because it's a little, the insurance adjusters know exactly how to sort that out, who's responsible for what. But you're absolutely correct. In a nutshell, the rising water that came in and messed up flooring and drywall and cabinets and furniture and stuff like that, that would be on the flood policy. And then the damage to the siding and the roof would be on the homeowner's policy. And you would have your deductible for both. So that would be a bit of a nightmare, but I know that's the reality for a lot of us around here right now.
Well, reality is, there's something to be said with a gut check. In all of my 9 years of presentations, I never really thought that we would have anything um, at the level that we're talking. 23 years living in Florida, yeah, I've seen rain, I've seen rising water, but I've 24 inches of rain in 5 hours. I, I don't know that in my lifetime we're going to see that again. I hope we don't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I listen to Public Works, and I've had them on my show, and you know that um, our 80 miles of canals are in the best hands ever with
Yeah.
the city of Northport, and they're not geared to handle that amount of water. There is no ifs, ands, or buts around that. This was a 500-year storm that really dumped an astronomical amount of water on us. And I think I don't know whether it's good or bad, to where people are analyzing things a lot different. I hate the fact that it's a wake up call now,
Yeah.
because we have a lot of citizens who have one, lost their homes, two, owed money on their homes, and three, didn't have the flood portion of their policy activated, and nor would they have expected that even from the lender
Yeah.
on that particular home. No lender would have required flood in a zone X.
Mm-mm.
I have a feeling that's going to be looked at a little different. And if they stay in the flood zone X, I mean, it's going to take another 500-year storm to do it, but they rework these flood maps every year or so. I can't imagine that they're not going to revamp all of our areas at some point.
Yeah. The flood maps don't get refreshed real frequently, and ours is actually relatively new, and
True.
uh, it's already a few years old at this point, I think. But yeah, Charlotte County. I don't think their new maps are published yet, but we're still using a pretty old map for Charlotte County, like 20 plus years old, I think. But I forget the dates off the top of my head because I've been reeling with a whole bunch of other issues, of course. Um, but yeah, they look at them periodically. I honestly hope that it goes more to the private sector, because all of that stuff, and as far as like the government control, all that's on the federal government at this point. So it's like it's tough to see where they would go with that and what their ideas would be. But the private sector, I think, hopefully has a better solution going forward. But it's going to take a while. But we're already a few years into them dabbling in this, and this storm will actually probably help them with some flood data, to help them rate these things going forward. So that's my hope, is the private companies get involved, because then when we buy insurance from them, the coverage is so much nicer that when we can get one of these private flood policies, it'll pay for them to live elsewhere. It'll give them replacement costs on their personal property, and it's just a so much sweeter policy if we can find it. It's not feasible for most people right this second, because it may be astronomically expensive, or it just may flat out not be available. But yeah, I don't know what they're going to do analyzing it, because this was such an anomaly as far as the event size goes. Um, it's tough to say that we would ever have something of this magnitude again. But they've got Northport pegged pretty well. I mean, it was interesting seeing what flooding happened where, with regard to the flood zones. And I know I've got one house not far off the Myakatchee Creek, and it's in a flood zone, and they have flood insurance, and it's inexpensive flood insurance, but they had 2 or 3 feet of water in the house. It was really deep, where this particular house was, and you know, same thing. The house has been there 20 plus years and never had an issue. And then wow, 3 feet. I'm speechless. Um, but yeah, to your point, a lot of these people didn't have flood insurance. Most people that if the mortgage wasn't requiring it and they were told, hey, this is quote unquote not a flood zone, which would be, a zone X, most people say, I don't want to spend any extra money on that particular policy, and I don't see it happening. And a lot of people don't have don't have flood, and unfortunately got flooded.
And what do people do now? And I'm going to ask you this because there is a third cog to the wheel. We talked about homeowners policy. We talked about flood insurance policy. There's also FEMA, who
Hmm.
is now here. Now FEMA, I know, in talking with them and trying to help others uh, figure out a game plan, because it's it's emotionally draining to go
Hmm.
through this. It's emotionally draining to help someone go through this. It's also emotionally draining to try to get solid answers, because through this whole thing, I've dealt with insurance, I've dealt with the flood insurance side, and I've dealt with the FEMA side for others. And I have to say, while I think they're doing a good job, I don't know that everything is communicated so that people understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you can answer that question either, because every scenario is different. And if let's just say that you had a homeowner's policy and you had FEMA backing it up, FEMA's not going to cover the nut of the flood. They're going to give you a portion of whatever they think might help you, but
Yeah.
it may never be enough. But yet the people still owe money on the house. They still have to pay the rent, or not rent but mortgage. They still
Hmm.
have to pay the insurance on a house that may never be lived in by them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, and I don't on the FEMA side of things, because that is the your last resort, that I'm aware of. Um, there are some charitable organizations going around, that are doing some stuff for free, but I mean that's still not typically rebuilding, but it at least help you with debris removal and clean up and getting damaged property out of the house and so on to prevent further loss. And then I've been doing a little bit of seeing some stuff online here and there. I guess FEMA, you can get their app and then apply through there and apply online, and then they're scattered around at some of these insurance villages uh, as well, trying to help people get applied. But from what I've observed and understand, if you have insurance, if you have an insurance policy, like you don't qualify, from what I understand, for the FEMA assistance, because it's on your insurance company
Not
and on you.
true. Not true.
It's
So
not true. Okay.
Evan, it is not true. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend, just like you and just like the insurance company say, file, file a claim. Go to FEMA, file a claim. Let them tell you no. Let them
Yeah.
tell you you can't get it. I know for a fact that one of my customers has homeowners insurance, has flood insurance, and has FEMA checks coming. And
Cool.
because he has mold growing in his home, they're actually paying him to live somewhere else.
Wow. Okay, that's great news.
Yeah, it's
Great news.
amazing, but and I don't want to get I really don't want to get everybody's hopes up.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, what is the worst thing that could freaking happen to you? Somebody tells you no.
Yeah.
All right, and here's the thing. I'm going to go right back to what I started with at the beginning of this show. Take the fear out of finding out, and just
Yeah.
freaking go do it.
Yeah.
Get your application done. Sit down with your insurance agent, and if you didn't have good coverage before this, and your friends around you didn't have good coverage before this, take the fear away. The worst thing you're going to do is find out.
Yeah,
I
you
the
don't have to buy it.
I'm so glad that you followed up with that, because the last time I checked, you're not holding people hostage until they buy everything you're trying to sell.
Nope, nope. I mean, we had that, one of my best customers, as everybody knows, the homeowners rates are getting crazy. He's in a boat, fortunately for him, where he can take on some of the risk himself, and so he said, let's whittle this stuff down. And we had the conversation. This is what this does, and this is what this does, and so on. And he, made the competent decision to say, well, let's go ahead and pull that stuff down. I'll take my chances, and um, that'll lower my policy, and and if something happens, it's on me. So then we talked a few days ago, and unfortunately, a bunch of stuff we whittled out of there is damaged. And and fortunately for me, he vividly remembered the conversation we had. He said, "I know," because I was just trying to see what was in there and what wasn't, because I knew we pulled this down. Just trying to get mentally prepared for what I'm gonna have to pull out of my pocket. And so fortunately for him, it's something that he can do. But most people aren't ready to pull tens of thousands of dollars out of their pocket to repair damage themselves. So we're much more in a, hey, let's get this covered as best as possible mode, and pay a little bit more annually on here, or in our mortgage payment, a few bucks extra a month, and then if something happens, we aren't devastated from it.
You and I, we've been working together, one on this show about 4 years. You've been on and off on this show for 4 years. We've been working together with customers now for probably 8 plus
Mm-hmm.
in my real estate career. And there was one thing that you told me right from the start, and you weren't the owner at that point. Mark was the owner. Do you remember what that was when I brought you customers? Because I'm gonna
Um,
remind you.
it probably was. I would think it was about insuring them like we insure ourselves. That's always kind of
That's
been sort of a
exactly what
mantra.
it was.
Okay.
I'm not going to give anybody any coverages. I'm going to quote them like I own the home, like I think it should be covered if I was the owner.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute that you said that, I had instant respect for the style of which you ran the business, because I always want my customers to have the best.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately and unfortunately, with this, I've got some customers who are in great shape, and I've got others who may not be in great shape but had good coverage.
Mm-hmm.
But my approach to this from now on will never be not to get both quotes. I'm
Yeah.
going to highly insist from this point forward, if you're going to buy any piece of property in the state of Florida, and I won't go up the coast because our water table here is different than anybody north. But I think from this point forward, I'm going to give both policies, even though the lender isn't requiring it. There's going to be a hit in some of these cases where there's going to be foreclosures. That
Yeah.
this market was not being hit by foreclosures. We were not seeing the foreclosure market that a year and a half or 2 years ago everybody said get ready. The
Mm-hmm.
banks are prepared for that now. They're wiser today than they were back in the last economic downturn.
Mm-hmm.
But here again, the banks are not prepared for this. This is totally different than houses that may have had copper stripped out or been in foreclosure. These are homes that now have been flooded, who need gutted. They're not slapping lipstick on the pig. They're not painting them up and selling them out on the market for bid. But these houses are going to be handled a lot different. And I see that being part of this whole situation now that we didn't have before. But I also see a lot of hardworking blue collar people who are going to find a way not to lose their homes because they
Hmm.
here's the funny thing, and I'm gonna go in a second, but where do you go? Where do you go? Where do these people in their mobile homes go? They're gone. They either buy a new mobile home and bring it in there, or where they leave.
Yeah.
There's nothing else to buy
Yeah.
at
No.
that point. But I've got to sign off on the radio. Hold on one second. This is John Rawlings with WKDW Radio 97.5 saying thanks for listening in and join us again on Monday. Talk to you soon. But I'm going to leave you on just for a second. I know you got to go back to work, and I really appreciated you really taking your time out of your day. But how would you end this show as an agent talking to your customers who are online right now? What would you tell them is the most important thing to do today and in the future?
Well, today, if you had damage, and most people I think have already probably gotten to this point, but some haven't. We've been talking to some that are having a hard time. But first thing, if you have a claim, our job as the homeowner is to take reasonable action to prevent further loss. So that's actually written in the policy that we're supposed to do that. And that's, the easy example there. So if we've got a pipe leak, well, go shut the water valve off, Um, so that's kind of the thing there. With this, it's let's get the damaged stuff out of there, so that more mold doesn't get everywhere. Try and mitigate that as best as possible. And I know our remediation companies are running around, like a bunch of us, just trying to do everything they can. Um, I was at my house, helping them do do the job because it was a big one. Um, but yeah, just try to prevent further loss. Be patient. Everybody's just inundated with everything. Just about everybody's been impacted pretty greatly by this whole thing. So all of our workers, between the restoration companies and the roofers and our claims adjusters and so on, be patient. They're working their way through it. Most of the carriers have been doing very, very good job. Um, Hang in there. I've been telling everybody, don't panic if you get a goofball for a field adjuster, because some of them, it's just like anything. You got 100 people, and a handful of them are gonna not meld with you, personality wise, or might not meld with anybody personally wise. So be patient with those guys, and let them come out, do their job. And then I guess the biggest thing to remember when the claims go on, the person inside the company. Most of these guys out here that are coming to your houses are not even from Florida, so they don't know some of these quirks of the Florida policy. They don't know um, uh, various things, and some of them can advise wrong things because there may be norms outside of Florida that they're used to. So they're not even usually employed by the actual insurance company. They're usually independent guys. So just remember that whatever they do and whatever they estimate out, you're probably going to get paid a whole lot more than that on your claim, because we do these supplements, and the person that sits inside the actual insurance company, called desk or inside adjusters, they're the ones that cut the checks and make the calls. And once they start seeing what these actual cost of the repairs are on each house, then they start cutting out checks. So I'm already seeing, I have one customer that already has multiple supplement checks cut. So they've got their initial payment and then have had, I don't even know how many supplements. She's on the ball getting all kinds of stuff into them, and they've already, approved her roof price and so on. So getting these supplements in, I've been seeing very positive activity on the insurance company's part, getting all of that in there. And like John said, you can only get a no by asking, whether it's FEMA or your insurance carrier or flood or whatever it is. It never hurts to ask. Any of those scenarios in life in general, I always, if the worst thing that's going to happen is a no, and it's something that I'm curious at or want, I'm going to go ask. Just what the heck, let's
So
throw it out there and see.
I'm going to say one other thing because you clued everybody on in what's happening today. The other side of that is if you haven't had a conversation about insurance, it's time to have one before next year.
Yeah.
It's time to get yourself in check, get your future set up so that you don't have this fear again. We have hurricane season every year. And Justin and we have been talking about hurricane season. And I promise you, every every news network, every cable network that's in Florida and representing Florida has had commercials about our hurricane season. There's people in Alaska that are well aware that Florida has hurricanes. That's a fact. Now,
Hmm.
that being said, every citizen out here right now who lives in any situation should sit down and take the fear out of going and having an open dialogue about your insurance policy on the most valuable piece that you'll ever purchase in your lifetime. That's what
Hmm.
is just dumbfounding to me is
Yeah.
that I'm having to say it's the most valuable piece of property that you're going to own in most cases, and you're not willing to have a conversation that ends with, I'll think about it, or yes, I'll take it. I, go
Yeah.
get educated by someone who knows. Justin, you are definitely somebody who knows. Your staff is definitely somebody who knows. You're not alone in the industry, right?
Mm-mm.
A
Nope.
lot of people are good agents out there, just like there's good real estate agents out there. I never just say there's just one. And I'm one of the real estate agents, but wouldn't you say take the fear out and just go get educated on what you can get?
Yeah, absolutely, John. That's something kind of made me think of a couple other things that we've been running into, and just to kind of reiterate your point, and it's something I've told my customers. We have too many people to keep after them one by one, and beg them to come in for an insurance review year over year. But as I talk to people, I always tell people at least every other year, it's a good idea, and I'm we're fortunate over here. A lot of our customers do this, and some of them do it on an annual basis. Some of them do it every 2 or 3 years. But things change, like you said. They may add a shed or a fence, or the pool cage thing that I had mentioned, where we've put 10,000 on all these cages that were, $6,000 to $8,000 to build, but that was 15 years ago, and now do we have enough coverage on there? Another example is that we've talked about in our agency a couple months ago, really bringing up for our existing customers and when we're writing new car insurance policies, but the cost of a rental car. Your normal rental car coverage on a car policy, if you even have that coverage, is $30 a day. Well, good luck, finding a rental car for $30 a day now. So, looking into that and saying, okay, this is another $8 per 6 months to go to $40 a day or $50 a day towards a rental car. And then those are unique situations because, well, maybe when I talked to them, a husband and wife, and we wrote them a policy, they had one car. Well, now they have two cars and they're retired and they go everywhere together in one car. Maybe they don't even need that coverage anymore. So uh, we find discounts. We find, that they didn't qualify for when they bought the policy, but now something's changed or there's a new discount that came out. A lot of that's automated, thank goodness, so we aren't missing it. But we do. We find this thing here or there. We find out, you know what? I had this and now I don't have a need for this, and this, so it might actually lower your price. But oftentimes as people grow, they've added something to the property, a pool, a fence, a shed, or whatever it may be, and we need to calculate for that because it's something that it's much better to at least know, because I have people call and say, hey, I've done this, how much more is it? And then they might say, you know what, I'm I'll just take the risk, and then on my end, we document that, hey, we talked about this, but then they've made that decision, which ultimately on your insurance policy, it's your decision. You're the boss. You get to choose what you put in there and what you don't. I just think a lot of people don't realize what is and what is not in there, and they just haven't had that conversation with their agent. So
Talk, 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 talk.
hmm I can do that.
Yes, you can. Justin, I appreciate your time. I'm going to send you back to your office and let you, or you're in your office, but back to work. But I truly appreciate you taking time out of your day and having really a totally different conversation than we usually do. But I would really like to sit down and do this again in the very near future, and even get. I would hope to be able to get 5 or 6 citizens online with us. I'm going to try to work that out in the very near future, where they can ask questions and feel like they're part of a roundtable discussion. I think it would kind of be a cool thing.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
All right, buddy. Well, you have a great day. I'll talk to you soon, and tell everybody I said hey.
Will do. Thanks, John.
Right. This is John Rawlings with KDW Radio 97.5 and Justin Box at Hardin Insurance Group on Toledo Blade saying thanks and have a great day. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
All right. See ya.